The skies above Roselle 5 bled amber. Ash clouds spiraled in slow death patterns across the ruins of the forward front, and the broken bones of war machines smoldered like the carcasses of extinct titans. The ground shook with distant detonations, but the line had fallen silent. Too silent. Lieutenant Cade Mercer pressed his back to a scorched durasteel column, breathing through blood in his teeth. His squad was gone. The dropship had left 2 hours earlier. No evac signal, no return call. Just static and fire. He'd lost count of the wounds, one gash across his hip, burns on his left shoulder, and a cracked rib that screamed every time he moved. Across the wrecked courtyard lay another survivor, female, alien, and barely conscious. She was tall, slender, but visibly wounded, her right arm shattered and held tight against her chest. Her skin glowed faintly orange in the dark, cracked with pale lines of blood that shimmered like embers. She wore royal patterns, elegant fabrics now torn and scorched. Beside her was a blade. Black, curved, ancient. It gleamed unnaturally, untouched by the fire around it. Cade had seen her earlier, dragged in by her guards before the last detonation. She'd shouted for them to hold the gate, to protect the wounded. Then the building collapsed, and the rest was smoke and chaos. Now she lay helpless, watching him from under half-closed lids, eyes like golden flame. Cade limped toward her, one hand holding his side, the other dragging his useless rifle. "Help me," she whispered. He crouched, checking her pulse, noting the slow, faltering thump. "Who are you?" "Valari, of House Sarnex." Cade's eyes narrowed. Sarnex, a clan name. One of the old bloodlines, diplomatic class from the Emberborn sector. Known for ceremony, known for their relics. Your nobility. "Not anymore," she said, coughing. More explosions thundered in the distance. Screams followed. Something was approaching. Cade turned instinctively, adrenaline surging, footsteps not friendly, fast. He turned back to Valari. "Can you move?" "No." He scanned the rubble. No cover, no exit. The sword beside her caught his eye. "No," Valari said hoarsely. "Don't touch it." "I don't have a choice. It's bound to my family. I'm trying to save your life." He reached for it. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, fire surged through his body. Not burning, not pain, but weight. As if the blade remembered things it wanted him to feel. The runes along the edge ignited in a pulsing glow. Cade felt his stance shift, felt the blade fit into his grip like it had been there all along. It didn't hum, it sang. A screech broke through the smoke. 3 enemy raiders in bone armor charged the ruins, plasma spears raised. Cade stepped in front of Valari and lifted the sword. The first attacker lunged and was sliced cleanly in 2. The sword burned blue fire along the edge of the strike. The second hesitated. Cade moved without thought, letting instinct take him. 2 more swings, 2 more bodies fell. The last one fled. Valari stared up at him, her breath caught in her throat. "You drew it," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, blinking at the weapon in disbelief. "Worked pretty damn well." "You don't understand," she said. "You drew my clan's sword in battle. That act." Her voice faltered. "What?" Cade asked. "What does it mean?" "It means," she said with trembling certainty, "by the oldest law of my bloodline, I am yours." The silence after the battle was heavier than the roar of combat. Cade had never liked silence. It meant time to think. Something he'd learned to avoid after losing entire platoons on planets whose names no one ever pronounced twice. He sat beside Valari in the ruin of the corridor, sword across his knees, her head resting on his shoulder. Her body burned with fever, but her mind was clear. She hadn't taken her eyes off him since he'd swung the blade. "What do you mean you're mine?" he asked at last. Valari's expression tightened. "You wielded a Sarnex blade, a blood relic. The sword was sealed to my soul, meant only for my future bondmate or family heir." "I didn't know," he said. "It doesn't matter. The sword did. It chose you. It didn't reject you. It ignited. It answered your grip." He looked down at the weapon, now dark again but still warm in his hand. "So I married you by accident?" "Not marriage," she said. "Deeper, older. You carried it in battle to protect me. Under our law, that act binds my soul to yours. Permanently." He laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a tired, half-crazed one. "I was trying to save your life, not own it. I know, that's why the sword accepted you." He stood and paced, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "So what does this mean exactly? You belong to me now?" "No," she said. "It means I choose you, because you protected me with more than your body. You wielded my clan's honor like it was your own." Cade shook his head. That's insane. I'm a soldier. I've lost more than I've saved. You don't want a life with me. You didn't ask for one either, she said softly, but the blade knows what the soul hides. He stared at her, at the faint glow in her collarbone, at the thin lines of silver fire that had crept into his own wrist since touching the blade. What if I don't want it? He asked, quietly now. She looked away. Then you may cast the blade into the sea before the 7th night, and the bond will die. But if you keep it, if you wear it into one more battle, then it will seal. And after that, we're forever, he sighed. And I suppose you'll come with me wherever I go. She met his gaze again. I already have. By the time the extraction shuttle finally arrived, the sky had darkened into a burned-out purple, and the fires of Rosale 5 still flickered over the ridgelines like angry spirits. Cade helped Villari into the seat beside him, the sword strapped to his back with cloth torn from his uniform. No one else on the transport said a word. Not the pilots, not the medics, not the other survivors with glassy, exhausted eyes, because everyone saw it. The weapon, the way it pulsed faintly against his spine like it still breathed, the way Villari's fingers grazed his sleeve whenever his hand left the hilt. There were no orders for this. No protocol, no briefing. Just the blade, the woman, and the growing ache in Cade's chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. He kept thinking about what she'd said. 7 nights. He had until the 7th night to choose. To cast the blade into the Sea of Kareth or accept it. And with it, As the transport broke orbit, Cade glanced sideways at her. She sat upright, still regal even in a scorched tunic, her face unreadable. But her golden eyes flicked to him now and then, checking for something. He didn't know if she hoped he'd accept the bond, or if she dreaded it. At the docking station in orbit, they were separated. She was taken to an Emberborn medical wing, a royal suite built in a crystalline wing of the ship. Cade was left with a stack of forms, a patched-up side, and an observation team that didn't know what to make of him. A man, a human, a lieutenant with no rank in Emberborn society, but with a sword no one dared take from him. When the Emberborn liaison arrived, her voice was cold. Lieutenant Mercer, you've broken a sacred right. Do you understand the implications of what you've done? I saved her life, he said flatly. Didn't exactly stop to read the fine print. You should have let her die, he stood. Say that again. Her eyes narrowed. She is the last heir of House Sarnex. Your contact with the blade has invoked laws that haven't been touched in centuries. If you don't complete the bond, she will be declared clanless. No standing, no title. She will lose her name. And if I do complete it? The woman stared at him. You will inherit half of her bloodline. You will be declared her matchmate. And by ancient law, you will never be allowed to leave her side. Not in peace, not in war, not even in death. Cade breathed in through his nose. They expected him to reject it, expected him to run, and part of him wanted to. But he remembered Villari's voice when she said, I choose you. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a door. When night fell on the station, he slipped out of the medical bay, sword across his back, and made his way to the royal wing. She was waiting for him in the atrium, alone, wrapped in a silver robe, sitting beneath a floating chandelier of soft flame. I knew you'd come, she said. He nodded. I couldn't sleep. I haven't either. He sat across from her. So, you said 7 nights. This is the 2nd. He stared at the blade resting beside him, then back at her. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. You're not supposed to feel anything, she replied. You're only meant to know. Do you? She looked down. I knew the moment you stood between me and death that, not because of the sword, because you didn't hesitate. Cade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've always fought to protect what I believe in, but I've never fought for someone. You did that day. He said nothing more. Neither did she. The bond didn't need words, just presence, and the fire that had only just begun to burn. The embassy walls shook with the storm. Thunder raged across the orbital canopy, a rare phenomenon caused by magnetic friction in the planet's ionosphere. Lightning crawled across the windows like molten nerves. Cade stood at the edge of the glass, watching the light ripple across the void. The sword leaned against the frame beside him, its pulse now matching the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He hadn't removed it once, not even to sleep. It wasn't obligation, it was something closer to instinct. He felt it in his bones now. The blade had accepted him, but more than that, Valari had accepted him. And in doing so, she had unknowingly carved a mark into his life far deeper than any battle scar. Behind him, her voice stirred the air. "They're gathering against us." He turned. She wore her ceremonial armor, not full battle plate, but the softer, flowing layers of her station, studded with luminous threads that hummed when she moved. She looked taller now, whole, a queen in every breath. "Who?" he asked. "Several houses, the old ones. They believe you've tainted the bond, that the sword was deceived." He smirked. "Blades don't lie. They think humans are beneath this tradition, that your soul isn't compatible, that I should have died before letting it happen." He stepped toward her. "I'd fight them all again, empty-handed this time." "You won't have to." Her eyes softened. "But we must declare our intent before the fifth night." He hesitated. "Declare it how?" "Publicly, at the Temple of Threadfire. The blade must be drawn there again, not in violence, but in vow." Cade looked at the sword. "And if I draw it, you'll finish the ritual, you'll bind us. And if I don't, then the bond will slowly unravel," she said. "And I will be clanless. I'll remember you, but you'll feel nothing, as if none of this ever happened." He looked at her a long time, then stepped forward. "Valari, yes, I never believed in fate, never had time for it. But since I picked up that sword, I've been remembering things I never knew, places I've never been, feelings that don't belong to any other part of my life." She stepped close, only inches between them now. "The sword binds what the soul already suspects," she whispered. He raised a hand, brushing her jaw with his fingers. "You were never just someone I saved," he said. "You're the reason I was there at all." And though neither said it aloud, they both knew. On the fifth night, he would draw the blade again. Not for war, not for honor, but for her. The Temple of Threadfire stood on a drifting plateau above the molten lakes of Sarnex Prime, its marble spires wrapped in plumes of heat light that shimmered like the memory of stars. Few were allowed to enter its sacred perimeter. Fewer still were allowed to speak within it. Cade Mercer stepped onto the ceremonial bridge flanked by silent guards, the wind pulling gently at his cloak. The air smelled of minerals and ancient promises. He wore no armor, only a simple tunic and the clan blade strapped across his back, humming against his spine as though it too had been waiting for this moment since the war. Valari walked beside him, every step measured. Her gown flowed behind her like flame, her hair braided with fine silver wire. She did not look at him, not from coldness, but because the ritual demanded stillness of heart until the blade chose again. Her hand, however, brushed his once as they approached the inner dais. It was enough. The central chamber was a circle of radiant crystal, pulsing softly with the breath of the world beneath. Seated on raised platforms were the remaining heads of House Sarnex, and beyond them, witnesses from allied clans, high-ranking priests, and even political delegates from the human colonies. Cade's presence had shaken the inner circle of Emberborn diplomacy. What had once been myth was now a man with mud on his boots and a sword none of them could touch. Valari took her place at the far end of the chamber. Cade stood at the center. The high voice stepped forward, draped in robes etched with the names of 1,000 blood-bonded ancestors. "Human," he said, voice ancient and resonant. "Do you understand where you stand?" Cade nodded once. "I do. You wielded the blade of Sarnex to protect one of its blood. You have since borne it without rejection. You have crossed into vow territory, but the bond is not yet sealed." Cade glanced to Valari. She did not speak. "This is the fifth night, the final moon before the bond locks. The sword must be drawn, not for combat, not for pride, but for truth. If the blade awakens for you once more, she is yours, not in conquest, but in essence. And if it doesn't," Cade asked quietly. The high voice lowered his gaze. "Then the bond breaks. The soul thread between you unravels and your history's part." The air grew still. Cade reached back. His fingers curled around the hilt. Or a heartbeat, nothing. Then the runes lit, slow, deliberate, as if waking from a dream. The blade whispered across the sheath as it came free, its edge gleaming with the light of all 9 moons above the open temple dome. A quiet gasp swept through the room. The sword pulsed once, then again. And suddenly, a thin ribbon of light extended from the blade, arcing through the air like a drawn thread, until it met Valari's chest. It touched her gently, then dissolved into her heart. The high voice stepped back. "It is done," Valari approached, eyes misted with something older than tears. Cade offered the blade, 2 hands flat. She placed hers over his, and they bowed to one another, not as warrior and noble, not as savior and saved, but as soul-bound. That night there were no fireworks, no public parade, just stars and silence, and the slow, irreversible settling of something eternal. Cade stood at the edge of Valari's family garden atop the upper towers, looking out over the glowing cityscapes of Sarnek's prime. He could feel the bond now, not as a burning or a chain, but a presence. A pressure that lived gently beneath the ribs. A soft echo when she moved, when she laughed, when she remembered. He hadn't realized until now how much he'd missed belonging somewhere. Valari joined him without a word, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The air was warm, but she always wore it when her mind wandered. "You know they're still whispering," she said. "Let them whisper," he replied. "They think the bond will tarnish the bloodline, that I gave something away." He turned to her. "What did you give away?" She smiled, faint and tired. "My name in some of their eyes." "But they don't understand what I received." He raised an eyebrow. "What did you receive?" Her voice softened. "A man who didn't ask for power, who didn't take me as a prize, who stood before a sword built from centuries of pride and drew it only to protect. Do you know how rare that is in our history?" He didn't answer. His hand found hers. She looked up at him, gaze burning with everything that the stars themselves had begun to envy. "You could have left. Cast the blade away. Let me fall into exile. You could have stopped me from touching it," he said. "Would you have listened? No." Then she whispered, stepping closer, "Perhaps the sword didn't choose us. Perhaps it simply reflected what had already begun." He kissed her. Not as a soldier, not as a bonded soul, but as a man who finally understood why the fire had never taken him. Because it had been waiting. For her. The peace after the bond did not last long. Not because of the bond itself, but because of what it represented. In the deep chambers of the Emberborn elite, there were those who saw Cade Mercer not as a protector, not as a chosen one, but as an invader. The joining of a human and an Emberborn noblewoman, especially through the clan blade, threatened every carefully guarded tradition they had etched in fire and blood. Word spread quickly through the high courts. In the southern provinces, statues were veiled. In the north, 3 rival families withdrew their pacts with House Sarnex in silent protest. And in the shadowed halls of the ancient Council of Elders, there were whispers of corruption, taint, and most ominously of all, the Circle. Cade had heard the name in passing. Valari had avoided speaking it until now. They were alone again on the tower gardens, but something had shifted in her. Her hand never left her waist, where a second blade now rested, one of her own forging, shorter and meant for defense. Her gaze never lingered long on the stars. She was bracing. "They've called for arbitration," she said finally, as he finished adjusting the solar panels on the eastern wing. "Arbitration," he muttered. "Sounds peaceful." "It never is," she said. "Not when the Circle invokes it. They'll demand the bond be tested again, not by ceremony, by combat." Cade blinked. "They want us to fight?" "No," she said, turning to him. "They want you to fight against a proxy." "A champion?" She nodded. "Someone of their choosing. If you lose, the bond is deemed invalid. I'll be exiled, the sword stripped, everything we've built erased like a myth." He was silent for a long time. "Then who's their proxy?" "Highborn," she whispered. "Trained in the old way, a warrior bonded from the House of Vare." He didn't ask more, didn't need to. He saw in her eyes that the opponent wasn't just lethal, it was personal, designed to break him and her. She stepped closer. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," he said, "I do." "Cade, this fight isn't fair. They'll twist the rules, they'll bait you. You may not survive." He stepped toward her, touching her cheek gently. "I didn't survive a war, a battlefield sword bond, and 5 nights of soul testing just to let some ancient council rip you out of my life." She took his hand, her voice tight. "Then if you fall, I fall too. Then I'll just have to win." The next day, the Circle summoned them to the old arena. It was an obsidian circle suspended over a sea of molten glass. Wind howled through the support pylons as if the world itself groaned beneath the weight of history. Valari stood among the witnesses. Cade stepped forward with the clan blade sheathed at his back. The opposing champion arrived in ritual armor, flowing red and jagged silver, eyes hidden behind a visor that reflected the flame below. A twin-bladed glaive spun in his hand like an extension of his will. The arbiter's voice rang out. This is not a duel. This is a reckoning. One bond, one blade, one outcome. No signal was given, no call to begin. The champion lunged, Cade moved, steel screamed, and history caught fire again. It wasn't the first blow that made the crowd fall silent, it was the fourth. Because Cade should have been overwhelmed. The Emberborn champion fought with a style honed across decades, spinning the glaive in brutal arcs meant to crush, to corner, to outmatch. Cade had none of that. No style, no flourishes, only grit, reflex, and something deeper. An instinct born not from technique, but from purpose. Every strike Cade deflected was not to defend himself but to protect something, not the bond, her. He rolled under a wide swing, slashed upward, and landed a shallow cut along the champion's ribs. A cheer rang out, then another. But the champion recovered too fast. The glaive twisted, spun, and knocked Cade flat across the stone, the while sparks sprang from his armor. The blade nearly fell from his hand. From the edge of the ring, Valari shouted something, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Cade staggered up, vision spinning. The champion was already coming again, this time with killing intent. He blocked once, twice, but the third strike, the glaive cracked into his side and sent him to his knees. Pain tore through him. Blood ran down his leg. The blade was hot in his hand, but heavier now. As if the bond itself weighed more when tested. The champion stepped forward, weapon raised, final strike drawn. And in that moment, Cade looked up, not at the blade, not at the sky, but at Valari. Her hands were clasped, her eyes filled with fire. Her lips moved, but this time, he understood. I choose you. Always. He stood, roared, and brought the sword up in a wide arc that caught the glaive mid-swing, shattered it, and spun into a final blow across the champion's chest. The Emberborn warrior dropped to one knee, then collapsed. Cade stood over him, breathing raggedly, blade pulsing, not with violence, but with victory. The arbiter stared in disbelief, then raised a hand. The bond stands. The crowd broke into murmurs. Some left in silence, some cheered, but none could deny what they saw. A human, untrained in their ways, had held the weight of their oldest laws and bent them. Valari ran to him, caught him as he staggered. He collapsed into her arms, blood soaking into her robe, but smiling through the ache. You're an idiot, she said, half laughing, half sobbing. Probably, he whispered. But now you're stuck with me. She touched his face. I've always been. Above them the blade shimmered, and the circle of elders seated high above watched not a man who defied them, but the one man they could never unmake. For the first time in its long and merciless history, the House of Sarnex did not hang its banners over blood-won victories. No procession followed Cade Mercer through the crystal gates. No choir sang in celebration of the bond he had sealed and defended. The old guard remained silent, buried in the weight of their pride, while the young, those unchained by rigid law, gathered in secret alcoves to speak his name in whispers like prophecy. Cade was brought to the high chamber of remembrance 3 days after the duel, still wounded, his ribs tightly bound and his gait stiff from healing. He refused the royal cane offered to him and leaned only on Valari's presence as they climbed the 1,000-step ascent into the temple where names were carved into the walls of legacy. He should not have been allowed there. Human blood had never been honored in that place. No outsider had ever stood before the flame pillar. But Valari walked beside him, eyes forward, voice clear. I've summoned the lore keeper, she said, to etch your name beside mine, to mark the bond. You sure they'll let you? She turned her head, a spark of mischief behind her fire-lit eyes. I'm not asking. The lore keeper waited in the shadows, face veiled in white, palms stained with ink made from phoenix sap and powdered obsidian. He knelt when they entered, not out of reverence for Cade, but for the sword, for the bond, for the ancient fire that had burned clean through centuries of arrogance. State the truth, the lore keeper intoned. Valari spoke, her voice resonating against the glowing walls. I am Valari of House Sarnex, last daughter of the Emberline. I was saved by the hand that now bears my soul. He wielded the clan blade in fire, and stood when all others fled. I name him not my guardian, not my equal, I name him mine. The lorekeeper turned to Cade. And do you speak in kind? Cade stepped forward, laying the sword at the base of the pillar. I am Cade Mercer, born to earth, bound by no right but the one I chose. I did not seek this bond. But I found it, and I will protect it, even from time. The lorekeeper unrolled a scroll, dipped his fingers in flame-born ink, and etched their names into the basalt altar. Side by side, intertwined, one in Emberborn, one in Terran script. As he wrote, the pillar flared, just once, bright enough to light the entire chamber. Valari took Cade's hand as the name cooled into permanence. He looked at her. "What does that mean?" She smiled. "It means they'll never be able to erase you." Above them, the old ancestors watched in silence, and didn't dare speak. They didn't stay in the city. Valari had always hated the stillness of high walls, and Cade had never been meant for silks or thrones. Instead, they moved to the quiet edges of Sarnek's territory, near the cliffs where the wind carried ancient songs and the sky was low enough to touch. They built a small home there, half glass, half stone, where the sunrise came in like a warm tide every morning, and the clan blade rested on a mantle carved with the same rune etched into their wrists. Cade healed slower than he liked. Some days he limped more than others. On others he woke in sweat, the memories of war clinging to his skin. But she was always there. Sometimes not speaking, just breathing beside him, and that was enough. The bond had grown silent, not gone, but quieter now, not needing to prove itself with flame. Instead, it pulsed like a second heartbeat between them, a shared thread, strong, gentle, permanent. Children from nearby villages began visiting, bringing broken tech and stories of ghost battles. Cade taught them how to fix things. Valari taught them how to listen, to wind, to stars, to one another. Together, they became a story not told by songs, but lived in soil and sky. One evening, as the third moon rose low and slow, Cade stood at the cliff's edge, watching the horizon blur with gold. Valari wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The war?" "No, the silence. Before all of this," he chuckled. "The silence nearly killed me. This saved me." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The elders still wonder how the sword knew." "It didn't," Cade replied. "I knew." She looked up at him. "I knew," he said again, "the moment I saw you bleeding and didn't hesitate. That moment, before I even understood what you were. I just knew you mattered." She leaned into him, and that's what made it real. He turned to her, kissing her forehead, her nose, her mouth. And in that kiss, no fire flared, because the fire had already done its work. It had burned through history, law, and doubt, and left behind only truth. Valari and Kay, bound not by conquest, but by choice. And the stars, drifting overhead in their slow, eternal dance, bent their light just slightly to shine a little brighter over the edge of that cliff. Because some bonds weren't made in war. They were made in love.